Hi, this is Mike Richardson, Professor at the Institute of Biology, University of Leiden. And I'm going to talk about macro photography in the field, handheld, really looking at wildflowers, a few insects and other carbon-based life forms. So we'll be taking with us in the field two very high-end cameras and macro lenses from Sony and Canon, some mid-range setups from OM systems, and at the budget end, two very interesting macro setups from Nikon and Olympus. And then just for fun, we're going to put a wildflower underneath a €100,000 Zeiss macro microscope just to see what that looks like.
So what is macro? Well, it's not a scientific term. It doesn't have any real meaning because magnification is a continuous variable, so there's no cutoff at which it becomes macro. Some people say, many photographers say it's when the object is the same size on the sensor as it is in real life. Perhaps the best way to think about it is in terms of the minimum field of view. And the minimum field of view is equal to the sensor size at 1:1. This is what it looks like in a schematic. So medium format, full frame, a bit smaller, APS-C, again sampling even less of the image, MFT sampling just the center of the flower, and 1/2.3 inches is sampling a tiny field in the middle of the flower. So with macro, your minimum field of view is somewhere between 2 to 3 centimeters at the high end and 2 to 3 millimeters at the smallest end. Now, when we lay 4 cameras out like this, on the left the smallest sensor and on the right the largest sensor, you can see that the whole camera slowly gets bigger and the lenses get bigger because the lens has to create a large image circle to cover the larger sensor. With an increase in sensor size, the cameras get bigger and bulkier and heavier and less portable, less compact. Also, the price goes up dramatically because larger sensors are much more expensive to produce. And in this set of cameras, there's a 10 times price range as you go from left to right. Now, the small sensor has an advantage for macro in that you get more of an effective magnification. So here we see a large sensor, this is just a schematic, with its dedicated 1:1 macro lens photographing a daisy. The daisy will appear the same size on the sensor as it is in real life. And because of framing and pixel distribution across the subject, in the end image file, you're going to have a very small daisy with not many pixels distributed across it. But with the small sensor at the bottom, that is deploying many more pixels across the subject, and the subject is filling the frame. The Olympus Tough series. I bought the Olympus TG5 because I went to the cloud forest in Ecuador, which is very wet, very humid. I didn't want to take my Nikon because it's not weather sealed. So this was a perfect solution. And it's a great field camera. It has a compass built in should you get lost. It geotags the photos. It does focus bracketing. It does movies. It's waterproof. It's shockproof. You can go underwater. And it just slips in your trouser pocket. The Olympus EM10 Mark IV. What a dinky camera that is. Here fitted with the Laowa 50mm macro, and that gives up to 4 times effective magnification. In terms of handling, the full frame camera is bulky and heavy. The lens is long. This is a 100mm macro lens, which in my opinion is far too long. I find long lenses very difficult to use in the field. The OMD EM1X is the ugly duckling of the group. It does look odd with the tiny lens on it, but it has double batteries and it geotags and it does focus stacking in the camera. The larger sensor Canon needs a longer focal length lens to get the same framing as the smaller sensor Olympus TG5. This gives a much smaller depth of field with many anthers out of focus, you can see here. The TG5 small sensor camera has a much greater depth of field because it uses a shorter focal length for the same framing. So everything's in focus. But the image quality is better with the Canon setup. This is because the Canon lens is much better than the tiny Olympus lens. And the larger sensor has better color depth, dynamic range. And small sensors reach their diffraction limit sooner, which means you get more diffraction at smaller f-stops than you do with a larger sensor. So all of this, when you look closely, a poorer quality image with the TG5. But when you look at both images side by side, not cropped, they're both pretty good. It's just the differences in the details. So, 2 biology master's students were able to join me, Juliet, and then behind the camera, Elena. And we went to some grassland along a canal very close to the lab where we work. This is the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, and you see how large this is for a handheld camera. I don't like long macro lenses. I've never used a long macro lens. I've always used a short macro lens, either 30, 40, 50 millimeters, that kind of range, because you tend to get less handshake, and I just find them easier to use, more controllable. This is the Olympus OMD EM10 Mark IV with the 30mm Olympus macro lens, which is a fabulous lens. It's 1.25 times magnification, so that's giving you 2.5 times magnification, full frame equivalent. And it's very stable, very easy to get good shots, very easy to control any camera shake. But this is a, short lens, long lens, this is all a matter of personal taste. And you just have to try out and see what you prefer. The Nikon D5-300 with the Nikon 40mm macro. This is a great camera because it has GPS. So it will automatically geotag your photos. It's a few years old now. It's discontinued. You can get it pretty cheap on the second-hand market, and the lens as well. It's a great lens, 1:1, and of course on APS-C 1:1 is about 1.5 times full frame equivalent magnification, and I used that for years. Here's the Canon again. You see quite a bit of working distance. A little bit difficult to keep it still, but I kind of was surprised. I enjoyed using the Canon and the Sony. They do have fabulous autofocus and image stabilizing, but unfortunately those two things don't really work well with macro, and the image stabilizing didn't help at macro levels. The Canon lens here is their RF macro, which is 1.4 times magnification. That's very rare to have a off-the-shelf dedicated lens that's automatic and goes above 1:1. So that gives the Canon setup a huge advantage over the Sony, because 1.4 times, when you're doing macro, you need all the help you can get to get detail. One way to get a higher magnification is to use the Micro Four Thirds system or any other small sensor. So with the OMD EM1X, which is Micro Four Thirds, The Laowa 2x macro lens gives an effective magnification in full frame of 4x. Juliet really enjoyed using this setup, and she got some great pictures of lichens here, which are not actually 4x, they're a bit less than that. You can see that the TG5 is the closest in. Sorry about this annoying hair. The Canon has quite a large field of view because I didn't go into the full 1.4x closest magnification. I went to about, this is about 0.6x, so the Canon already has a disadvantage. Now, does it mean that the TG5, which has a much higher magnification than the Canon, does it give greater detail? All right, we're zooming in on the Nikon. It's okay, but we don't quite get cellular resolution. Maybe you can just see some cells. Here, you can see pollen grains, which, well, they are cells, but they're very soft. Now, with the Laowa on the OMD EM10 Mark IV, much better. The pollen grains are sharp, and you can see single cells in the glandular trichomes. TG5 here is really good. Single cells in the trichomes, stigma, pollen grains. Again, just at the limit, if you go in, they pixelate. What about the Canon, where I didn't go to the full 1.4x magnification? Wow. That is superb. Cellular resolution. Things look sharp. Even with that level of crop, I think probably the best detail of all these crops. But the Olympus not far behind. Well, I'm really surprised by this. Really surprised. I was expecting the OMD with the Laowa, because that's got really 4x effective magnification compared to the 1.4x of the Canon. But they're almost the same. So I took a yellow rattleflower into the lab and set up some studio pictures. All of them look fabulous, but I think the prize goes to the Canon. It just has a slight edge, even though its magnification is much less than the others.
Well, I promised to show you a flower under a macro microscope. So let's head to the imaging unit and we'll say hello to some of the students on the way. We have a very international group of Master's Biology students. We have Spanish-speaking students.
De hecho, no estamos mirando un gen, estamos sacando la cera que hemos utilizado para penetrar el tejido.
Dutch speakers.
We zijn niet naar een specifiek gen aan het kijken, maar we zijn nu aan het deparaffineren. Dus het
English speakers.
Today we're looking at HOX D8 and
Laia also speaks Catalan, by the way.
You want to be a teacher?
Maybe one day, hopefully, yeah. But I also love doing research, so maybe I will combine it someday.
Deze al, is het stage 8 of stage 9?
8.
En deze is wel meer gesloten dan die vorige, toch?
Ik denk het wel. Dus
Want
hier
bij
zie
die
je
vorige was dit heel erg sterk.
Ja.
En nu is het meer, het is allemaal een beetje egaal sterk. Alleen hier en hier is misschien iets sterker.
Ja, maar die vorige was inderdaad nog open bij
Ja, deze is iets meer gesloten.
Ja, klopt.
Want anders nog, die 6 is bijna perfect. Ik zou
Ja, ja.
maar zeggen dat dat precies is waar we hem verwachten.
The stage control is relative to the zoom. If you're very much zoomed in, it moves a lot slower. Yeah, so there's one more with pollen on it. try to angle it so that you can see it from the top. Is the angle good like this?
Perfect.
Yeah. Then we zoom in.
Oh wow.
We can go even further if to change the focus.
Oh my gosh.
Go. Yeah, kind of expected the pollen to look different.
Did you? In
Yeah,
what way?
I don't know, just not to have a shape, but it's just
Yeah, it's pure sphere, isn't it?
It's just round.
Spiky pollen. So you're setting the range of the stack, aren't you?
yes. Yeah, I'm defining the first and the last stack. Then it decides it needs 1200 slices, which is way too much because it made the slices very thin. But the optimal size is 3 micrometers, so that's what we're going to do. Then it will still be 443 slices, but with an exposure time of 70 milliseconds, it will take only a minute or two.
Well, so there you have it. What are the conclusions? Very surprising to me, there seem to be 2 ways that you can get high spatial resolution in macro photography. And the first is to go for high magnification. And that can be achieved by optical magnification, so you choose a macro lens which is greater than 1.1, or you go with the small sensor size, which gives you a higher effective magnification, or both. And then the other alternative, which is, this was the surprise for me, you can go for a fabulous quality lens. It doesn't have to be high magnification. It can be 1:1, or in the case of the Canon lens, it's 1.4 times. But the 3 big camera companies that do full frame, so Sony, Canon, Nikon, they do flagship macro lenses, 1 each. And so the Sony is 90mm, the Canon is 100mm, and then Nikon is 105mm. And those 3 lenses are spectacular in their optical quality. And you put them on a full frame camera with a great sensor, and then the images they produce are not very high magnification, but they're so good that you can crop quite close and you still get a very usable image. So that's basically your choice. And I suppose ultimately it will depend how deep your pockets are, how much of a heavy camera you're willing to carry around, how much you want portability, and so on. I also noticed in the field tests that doing handheld macro is doable at 1:1. 2 times magnification, it gets tricky because you get a lot of camera shake magnified. And when you get to 4 times macro, it's very difficult to keep the camera still enough. And there are some photographers who do routinely take 4 times macro figures handheld. For example, Jamie Spenceley or Ryan Dale have YouTube channels. Ryan Dale's is called Red Owl. And they are young macro photographers in the UK who do often 4 times magnification. Handheld, no problem. But there you go. I hope you found this useful. And thank you very much for watching.
Hello, I'm Mike. handheld, which is one of the most difficult forms of macro photography. And we'll be taking with us into the field two very high-end setups from Canon and Sony with equally high-end Sony and Canon macro